Some 2 years after launch, it's hard to truly understand where Stadia is as a platform without first recognising some of the ups and downs along the way. So this is our 2-year review of Google Stadia. Thanks for watching 9 to 5 Google here on YouTube. Remember to thumbs up, hit subscribe, and then tap the bell icon to be notified about all our future uploads. Let's start with what has been good with the platform so far, because Stadia has slowly evolved since its inception and release in 2019. More features have been added and the platform is starting to feel much more stable than at any time since it did initially launch. Each month, our APK Insight team unearth ongoing work on new additions, features and functions, which is always a good sign of a platform's health. All around gameplay is also still really smooth and consistent, and it's among the best out there. There have been very few outages with the System 2 over the 2 years that the platform has been live, which is unlike many other services out there. While it could be anecdotal, it almost seems as though performance has increased in just about every sense. That extends to just about every device you now own, and you can play Stadia on even more device types than ever before as more devices have been added to the support list. Looking at the game library, Cyberpunk 2077, arguably the biggest game launch in probably a decade across the entire industry, was plagued with issues when it was released back in December 2020, but on Stadia it was pretty much flawless and one of the best ways to play. All day one patches are done, dusted and pre-installed on the moment that you fire up any game or any title on Stadia 2, which means you never have to worry about massive patches and downloads, and it's something you don't easily forget, and it's one of the core strengths of cloud gaming and Stadia as a platform on the whole. Expanding upon that though, while the game library is not massively extensive, you now have more choices than ever before. Almost all major game categories are covered, things such as sports, RPGs, FPS titles, and there's even more indie titles than you can shake a stick at. Sure, not all major games are available outside of Ubisoft's lineup probably, but you should be able to find something that you will like and enjoy, at least to play on a casual or even a long-term basis. One of the side benefits to this smaller library though is that if you subscribe to the paid Stadia Pro tier, you can often get newly added games as part of that $9.99 fee. Sometimes you will get older AAA titles, but it does vary from month to month, with indie games obviously helping out bolster that free game figure. Stadia has a very small but engaged community that is passionate about every snippet and tidbit, and again, this is something that you would and could usually associate with larger gaming platforms. The community is arguably one of the better or even best aspects of Stadia, and there is a real faith shown by fans across all facets of social media. This even extends to the team behind Stadia Online. They engage with fans and detractors alike, and gaming itself can be quite a toxic hobby, and the various public faces of Stadia do seem to handle things with aplomb, at least compared to some other people and other platforms out there. I must admit, I've loved every minute of the Stadia controller too. Some 2 years on, the battery's not quite what it once was, but it fuses some of the very best components of other gamepads into what I would consider an excellent package. I'd even go so far as to put it near the very top of the best controllers you can buy list, as it's comfortable, durable, and it looks great, and it just works exceptionally well as a generic controller for Android games when hooked up via USB-C 2. On top of that, it also seems to play nicely with Nvidia's GeForce Now service when connected via wire to my PC or any laptop, making this a multi-talented controller that you can use for just about everything. So that's the good things out of the way. We need to dive into some other aspects of Stadia, and sidelining any sort of excitement for the many features that were promised back at the original GDC 2019 showcase, those that have made the grade haven't quite been as killer as we would have hoped, at least prior to the launch and showcase of cloud gaming on Stadia over the past few years. Stream Connect is a great example, as we think this should be incredible, and it lets you play cooperative multiplayer titles with live feeds for your teammates visible on screen. Unfortunately, this isn't quite as well implemented as we would have liked in just about every game that includes it so far. For competitive first-person shooters, it's a great option, but we've not seen it widely adopted or available by many games. State Share is another one of a few standout additions. It's just really cool to be able to send someone a screenshot or clip and have them attempt a level that you've just happened to clear. In Hitman 3, for instance, sharing a screenshot saves your level starting conditions, including all loadout information, rather than the exact in-game settings at the point the screen grab or recording was taken. My personal gripe is that this could be a little bit better, but obviously this is clearly down to limitations and how it has been added. Developers obviously have to implement it themselves, and the feature doesn't feel fully realised. It is still though one of those nice to have additions to the system. The crowdplay feature was touted before launch, and this relies heavily on Stadia's YouTube account integration, which does make it a niche but neat inclusion all the same. When live streaming a game to YouTube, you can use the crowdplay feature to invite viewers to a game directly. For big streamers, this could be a blessing or a curse, but it's different from what is available elsewhere across PC and console. The only downside is that limited use cases for most gamers out there means that if you're not streaming, then you may never even use it or know that it exists. That said, when you do stream games, it is again one of those nice to have options that Stadia has added over the past 24 months. Direct Touch and Phone Link are less obvious but powerful extra tools that do make sense for a cloud gaming service such as Stadia. When many PC games require mouse and keyboard input, a feature like Direct Touch is excellent for touchscreen devices, whereby it's more or less inferred that you will tap, slide and pinch at your screen to access UI portions. For RTS titles, of which there are quite a few now on Stadia, it's an added quality of life addition that is incredibly useful and lets you play on the go and on the devices you already own. Phone Link is just a way to add all kinds of controllers and peripherals simply by connecting directly to your smartphone and bridging to your Stadia session. This also lets you use your smartphone as a gamepad if you don't happen to have enough controllers lying around and want to engage or partake in couch co-op or even multiplayer. It's one of the best examples of Google's use what you have approach to Stadia, and it is my personal favourite addition over the past year. Naturally though, while all of these additions might not have people rushing to try Stadia, it is still great to see the ongoing development and integration of new functions and features, and this goes a long way to fulfilling some of the promises made during the original launch keynote, and we're sure that the fans out there will appreciate it. In the very same breath though, you could also quite easily argue that many things are still missing. Understandably, this can make Stadia sometimes feel a little bit unfinished or unpolished when compared to those early pre-release demos of the system over a couple of years ago. One such example is the frustration of taking over a year for a dedicated Stadia app to come to Android TV, and that highlights this unfinished feeling. Sure, the dedicated app for Android TV does work fine in our experience, but I personally think that the best way to play remains via the Chromecast Ultra, mainly as it's just a no-nonsense but effective way to get playing your favourite Stadia games. On top of that, through no fault of Google, Apple's limitations on gameplay within the dedicated Stadia app for iPhone and iPad meant that iOS players had to wait longer than their Android counterparts. An official Safari-based web app workaround feels a little bit hacky, but the experience is excellent nonetheless, and in some cases, Stadia feels like it plays better than iOS than it does on Android. Even with Apple's annoyances, it's nice not to be inhibited by your smartphone or tablet choice any longer, and it's a welcome addition for many players out there. It's hard to deny that Stadia has had a lack of real titles to choose from, but that has undoubtedly improved over the past couple of years, as you'd expect. At the last count, with a few removals and some recent additions, there are now over 230 titles available on the Google Stadia Store. Every month, a handful of new games do make the jump from other platforms or launch on Stadia itself though, which is always a nice sign. The slow growth of the game library though is undoubtedly a battle axe that hardcore gamers will swing at the service, and with good reason. No console, be that cloud or otherwise, or even PC, can survive without games, and Stadia is absolutely no different. Earlier in the year, Google did shutter Stadia Games and Entertainment, and this essentially ended any chance of exclusive, internally developed first-party titles. Now that is going to be a body blow for just about any gaming platform, and Stadia, again, is no different. Google claimed to be moving away from creating first-party titles and instead helping developers get their titles on the service. You could read this in a few ways though. Google understands that creating brand new gaming IPs is a difficult and expensive task. Alternatively, Stadia hasn't quite hit the heights that Google had hoped, and this is the early signs of the service winding down. It's still hard to truly tell, but it's not a good look no matter how you spin it. Ubisoft is one of the few larger developers to keep pushing the most recent releases on the service, while Cyberpunk 2077 and EA's FIFA series and Madden series represent the biggest IPs available on Stadia, at least since late 2020. The high-profile closure of Stadia Games and Entertainment, though, simply means that internally developed titles are shelved, and even the most confident fan can't sugarcoat this. We've even seen a few Stadia exclusive titles jump ship since that announcement was made, with open world adventure Chia now coming to PC via Steam and the Epic Games Store as well as PS5, the Stadia version has been dropped altogether, which is really disappointing to hear and not a great look for the service yet again. What's equally frustrating though is that many of the games that are available do run exceptionally well on Stadia. There are a few notable exceptions and technical limitations here, but it's hard to deny just how good Stadia is when it's in full flow. It's just a cloud console that outputs at various resolutions based upon your subscription tier. This means as a developer you don't necessarily have to worry about optimizing your games for a base specification, as there are technically two sliding tiers between 1080p and 4K UHD. This should mean that developing or porting could technically be quicker than it would be otherwise, although there are other variables at play here. A quick glance though at Stadia's storefront and you'll quickly notice that AAA game titles are lacking. Indie titles and last-gen reboots and remakes and reissues seem to be quite plentiful. Cloud gaming is ubiquitous, but there are many games littering the Stadia store that can run more or less well on any modest PC hardware nowadays. In some ways this doesn't matter, but with Nvidia GeForce Now providing access to GTX 3080 powered cloud connected PCs and a game library that includes some of the biggest and best PC games out there, Stadia is very much behind the curve, at least at this point of 2021. It's also worth noting that install base is going to be an important metric, and it's been 2 years since Google launched Stadia and we still don't know how many people are signed up, have trialed or even used the service on a regular basis. That definitely appears like a red flag, especially when Google is quick to report on the increased usage of things like YouTube Music and its other streaming services. It's hard not to be concerned when we don't even have an idea 2 years after the platform officially went live. Just as a health rating, it would be nice to know what the player base looks like. We'd wager it is relatively low, and that is based upon almost 2 years of struggling to get into large online multiplayer lobbies or even find players in certain PvP titles. It's also worth noting that developers will want to know this, as they will want a fair idea if they can actually make money by offering their games on Stadia. With no public information, budding indie devs and even big teams will simply steer clear, and it's hard to blame them. If the player base figure is so horrendously small or low that Google is too embarrassed to publish them, then we're sure that certain social media outlets and accounts will be vindicated sooner rather than later. One saving grace though is that with the new 30-minute game trials, gamers out there can at least give certain Stadia titles a whirl before committing to a purchase or subscribing to a pro tier subscription or even just opening a Stadia account. The games available will vary from month to month, but this does offer an incentive for would-be devotees and even detractors to give Stadia a test for themselves and see if it works for them. One major problem facing Stadia is that of competing services that seemingly have a greater ability to capture the hearts and minds of gamers out there. Xbox Game Pass provides access to over 300 of the best Xbox One, Series S and Series X games across your Android and Windows devices, all for just $15 per month. Nvidia GeForce Now can be played for free in limited sessions, but relies heavily on your existing game library across a number of connected PC services such as the Epic Games Store, Steam, EA Games and Uplay. You can access longer gaming sessions and improved graphical options with the Priority membership, which provides 6-hour gaming sessions with RTX graphics enabled at up to 1080p and 60 FPS settings. Graphically though, Nvidia's introduction of a limited RTX 3080 tier puts every other cloud platform or even console to shame out there. It also means that if you don't have the means to access one of the highly sought after graphics cards, you're still able to game at the highest fidelity on the hardware you do already have. Priced at $99 for 6 months of access, it seems expensive, but it does pale in comparison to the $699 retail of an RTX 3080 graphics card. Factor in the online scalpers are asking $1,000 plus, and this does seem like a great alternative. At $9.99 per month, it is easy to say, or at least at first glance, that in some key areas, Stadia isn't quite up to the level of competitors. That said, when you're playing, everything else just seems to melt into the background, and that is the core reason why it plays so well and it is so fun to use. Even so, to compete in the graphical stakes, it will take a sizable upgrade to the platform, and that is one that is likely going to be player base dependent. Stadia though is in a unique position in that Google is really well placed to add a number of features that simply wouldn't be available on other gaming platforms out there. While this doesn't mean that players will be flocking to Stadia, we think a few changes or new additions could really pique the interest of casual gamers looking for somewhere to play their big titles. Take YouTube Music for example. Google's premier music streaming platform should really be available on Stadia as a way to stream your playlists within games without needing another device. PlayStation offers Spotify integration when gaming, So why isn't Google exploring that option on Stadia with YouTube Music? Well, also on top of that, how about increasing your screenshot and screen recording storage vault by linking to your Google One or your Google Drive account? This could be as easy as just linking to a shared folder, and it enables easy access to your screenshots and video clips without ever needing to have to actually launch the Stadia app directly. We can already stream directly to YouTube with Stadia. Well, how about YouTube Shorts or clips creation straight from the Stadia dashboard? The last decade has seen that gaming clips and streamed content is how games like Among Us and Fall Guys have rose to prominence. YouTube is at the forefront of on-demand gaming content, so why not yet add more links to Google's game service, as it was only ever going to be a benefit? Realistically, it feels like all the pillars are in place, but they just need to be rearranged so that Stadia is able to remain somewhat stable among a very competitive industry. During the original keynote back at GDC 2019, we were told that anything was possible with cloud gaming, but at the moment, while the experience is fairly superfluous, there aren't that many outright wow factors beyond the hardware no longer being a requirement and being able to use whatever device you happen to have. It is always important to gauge public perception, and to say that Stadia has had a lukewarm response from gamers and the wider public is probably going to be an understatement. Hardcore gamers simply do not take Stadia seriously, while tech fans are concerned about potential abandonment, and they're available in equal supply. A quick browse of any comments section or story posted on a dedicated gaming outlet gives you a good indication of what traditional gamers think of Stadia. And spoiler, it ain't good. On top of that, if you ask someone who isn't plugged into gaming or is just a casual gamer if they've even heard of Stadia, and the conversation will usually start and end with a question, another spoiler, they simply won't know what Stadia is. To make something a success, it has to be said eyeballs are going to be needed, and at least in the 2 years since its launch, most of the biggest storylines surrounding Stadia have been overwhelmingly negative, and I won't stand here and claim to know how to turn the tide, but Google really needs to try and do more than to just leave things where they are, and at least maybe change some sort of public perception of the platform, as it isn't completely terrible. So if you've made it this far, you might think that this retrospective is overall quite negative. Well, the truth is that Stadia is my actual primary gaming service of choice, and much of my gripes are my major personal concerns. I still love that I can play across my PC, laptop, TV, smartphone and tablet, but I feel there is so much more room for improvement in areas that other services simply cannot compete in. If Google is holding on a little longer to improve the actual streaming hardware, then why not improve in areas that are not reliant on GPU and CPU power? Tighter integration with more Google services would be a great start and a really good way to bundle things together. This could even help convert a few more people and maybe raise the overall public awareness. Being real for a moment though, it would be naive to think that Stadia could directly compete for the mindshare with the likes of PlayStation and Xbox in just 2 years. For the sake of comparison, Microsoft ultimately failed with the original Xbox in terms of sales when compared directly to the PS2. Then, just one generation later, the Xbox 360 was exceeding the PS3 in the same direct head-to-head sale charts. Now, the crux of that overturn was on the back of exceptional first-party titles and a cheaper console hardware overall. You could argue that with Stadia, the cost part is relatively low, but the limited game library is always going to be the toughest sell for the platform. The sad truth is that during a global pandemic though, where millions of gamers and would-be gamers couldn't actually get hold of new gaming consoles and PC parts remain in short supply, at least from the outside, Google continues to fumble what could and should be an easy touchdown for Stadia. At a time when gaming is at an all-time high, cloud gaming services offer a way into titles that the traditional gaming paradigm simply cannot provide. At the end of year 2 in Stadia's life cycle, this remains a huge, glaringly massive missed opportunity, an opportunity that likely won't come again. If Stadia does have a future as a white label service, then a perceived lack of effort to market and push what is an impressive product does the teams of people behind all facets of Stadia, the platform itself, a massive disservice. Rewind to just a year ago, and it felt very much like Stadia was close to making a breakthrough. A lot has happened since then, and while there has been undoubted progress, it feels like in many other areas, Stadia is somewhat behind the curve. Where it heads though is now ultimately up to Google, and we're just enjoying it, at least as long as it lasts. So just what the future holds we simply do not know, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on Stadia. What do you hope for the platform in the coming months, and hopefully in the coming years? Let us know down in the comment sections below, but this is Damien with 95 Google saying thanks for watching, and I will speak to you later.